Good evening. Thanks for being here. This is the first time doing this on YouTube Live, but this is, I think, where the daily discourse will be. So let's see how this goes. Yesterday, someone had asked about prayer, so perhaps today that can be the topic of discussion, very loosely, very briefly, not going too far into it, but for anybody just tuning in at 7 p.m. each night Eastern time, trying to have daily. Again, this is the first time doing it on YouTube. I think this will be where it's done continually just for ease. The second is with meditation, but simply put, meditation is the act of being. It is this natural state, and we can all innately recognize it. It's this abstraction, and it's difficult to put into words. But a good way to try and understand it is to think about this magnificent sunset, right? Standing on the beach or in a meadow or on a mountain, and the sky is just illuminated with this beautiful display of colors. And one person turns to the other and says, "How peaceful." And so peaceful, broken down literally, full of peace. And that moment was full of peace. But peace is this abstract concept that it can't really be captured by words. And yet it's something that we all truly understand and can relate to it simply because peace is this part of our nature that all beings innately understand. So similarly, meditation is the act of returning to stillness. And if anyone is interested in hearing more about this, there's an audio recording on YouTube that it kind of examines this process in much more detail. I believe if you do a search for "Just Relax, a short discourse on meditation," it should come right up, and it will go through kind of the process of stillness as best I could describe it. So stillness, like peace, though, it's this abstraction, and it's beyond any real description, but we all can understand it because it dwells within everybody. And if you're shaking your head in disagreement, I promise you that stillness is there. You just might not realize it. And the idea is to reshape the perspective of life from reactive to reflective. And so moving away from a reactive disposition, it helps to set this basis for stillness, because we're not as prone to jump to a response to things that happen, even small things, day-to-day, small day-to-day things, right? If we can let this reactive nature go, it's easier to understand stillness, because there's the metaphor of the pond, right? It's ideal for this because the pond is always trying to return to this stillness, part of the nature of the pond. And it very naturally, it seeks to return to stillness constantly. It endures all things patiently. So for many of us, we're constantly disrupting our still and level surface because we're constantly surrounded by some sort of stimulation, right? There's movies, television, music. Even after the stimulus is gone, the thoughts of it are still sitting in our minds. And in some sense, they kind of stain the pureness of stillness in our thoughts. So I'm in no way commenting on the value of movies and music and the like, just simply acknowledging them as they are, which is an external stimulation. However, maybe more important to note that we often have a choice of what we choose to surround ourselves with. But that's just a bold opinion. But anyway, so meditation is a process of returning to that stillness. Again, there is a longer discourse on that, and it's something that can absolutely be addressed at another talk. But however, the original question was about prayer. So why begin with meditation? Because it's important to realize that meditation is not a practice unto itself. It's what prepares us for prayer. And the more that meditation becomes a daily routine, the more the mind is prepared to embrace stillness. And it's in stillness that prayer, or in this sense, communion with God, exists. Okay, so that being said, we'll put it aside for now. We'll come back to it shortly. There are several types of prayer, categories of prayer. Again, just going to go through this rather quickly. So if I say anything that needs clarification, just prayer in the sense of like a daily kind of conversation with God, very informal communication, which would be praying. And then the act of kind of this holy prayer, this holy listening, they're all very much intertwined, and we'll digress from prayers to praying, which is, for lack of a better phrase, an informal dialogue, to prayer. So I guess the thing to remember in this then, so by filling our mind constantly with prayers, we can pray more often in this informal conversation, which makes it easier for this sort of mystical prayer of just listening, more accessible. Don't want to go too deeply into that right now, but prayers, leave some around the house, constantly redirecting you to God's presence. And then you begin talking to God throughout the day in this sort of informal praying. And all this sets the stage for that deep and beautiful time of prayer, right? Where the basis is just listening and letting God direct the conversation. The whole thing is a process, but it starts very simply with just saying hello to God every so often throughout the day and kind of let it develop on its own. All the same, the more we pray, the more we deepen our relationship with God. So the less we choose to fill our mind with unnecessary external stimulation, the more we can fill our minds with prayer, or better yet, empty our minds for prayer. There's a beautiful line in Scripture where John the Baptist, he says that he will thoroughly clean out his threshing floor and gather his wheat into the barn, but he will burn up the chaff in unquenchable fire. Taken out of context, so forgive me for doing that first and foremost, but looking at it more introspectively, right, it can be seen as putting everything that fills our minds out on a table before us, and the entire table is going to be cleared, right? He will clear his threshing floor. So we have to store the things that bring us closer to God, put the wheat in the barn, and burn away the rest, anything that does not help us in this pursuit, right? We have to really see what is it serving us in day-to-day life, and is it worth hanging on to? If not, clear it. And this stems even further into just daily practices and saying, what do we spend our time doing each day? And so often, talking about meditation, people say, well, I have no time to meditate and I have no time to pray. And an issue unto itself, but where are the hours, the minutes, the seconds of each day going? And what are we filling our minds with? And important to consider this and let go of that which distracts us and that which takes us away from it. It's this drastic needing to change of priorities, but very important to do so. And the more we fill our hearts with prayer, the more we become aware of God's presence around us, which is everywhere at all times. This in itself is incredibly transformative. Slowly walk out of view or get out of the mud. And similarly, once we understand that God is always with us, if we choose to open ourselves to grace, then you can't be in constant, deep, heavy thought about the sunshine, right? Or its simplicity of its beauty is lost. And it's in this idea that contemplation fills you with such a joy that it changes everything. And then you can inspire others to do similarly. And simple contemplation, again, using going out in the sunshine as the same example. It's just overjoying the simplicity of it, the warmth and the beauty that you feel, and all the good that it does, rather than thinking heavily on like what sunshine is and God being the same way. There's a time for thinking about very deep and concepts and whatnot, but very simply just looking at all of the blessings that we have in life and all the simple things. I mean, breaking it down so simply is being so grateful for every day, for every meal, for every breath. You see the simple graces in everything. But now, continuing on this path, right? Special graces and moments of intense clarity aside, this is where we go back to meditation. Because in the depths of stillness is silence, and it's this divine, reverent silence. And if God is always with us, but we're constantly overstimulated and rarely take time to stop, how can we listen to that voice? And so it becomes incredibly important to develop a practice of stillness and to develop that stillness of mind to do this. And this is that other sense of the word prayer, where we are just listening. And similar to being surrounded by the sunshine, you're just filled with love. And in true prayer, in this stillness, all you want to do is listen and be engulfed by it. And so everything spoken about thus far, right, it has this conversion of how we think and how we act. We have to get rid of one thought process to adopt another one. And it is in emptiness that we seek this void of the self and this emptiness of thoughts and stillness and quietness. Again, not to be in this place all the time, but to have a daily practice in stillness, right? When we hit that stillness in prayer, we're not asking God for anything, but genuinely listening to what we are being called to do. And this is humility, and it's the basis of a real conversation with our Creator. Anytime you pray, God will answer. Sometimes the answer is silence, and that's okay. But the more and more that we put our minds to prayer, and the more that we redirect our focus to our Creator, the more we let go of ourselves, and the more our minds are focused on God, the more we fill our hearts with love, the more our minds, again, are focused on God. I use the word focused rather than centered because there's this interesting, a little tangent, forgive me, but in wording of things, right? Having a God-centered life and a God-focused life. I imagine a spider web, right? And if something is the center of the spider web, it can be crowded out by other things. And so depending on what else is caught in that, whereas if you have a God-focused life, right? The focus is always God, and everything that comes into your life just exists on the periphery. And that focus of God shines a light on all the things that come into the periphery. And you see the hand of the Lord in everything. So I guess back on track then, as far as what we surround ourselves with, and as far as prayer, and opposed to external, unnecessary external stimulation and what have you, it's kind of, you'll find that you need less of it because the quality of it is so much better, and thus your health is all the more better. Similarly, right, we don't need the spiritual candy or the non-spiritual candy of the world when we have the capacity and the ability, to develop, to cultivate such beautiful spiritual nourishment in our minds with prayer, always preparing ourselves for those opportunities of silence to hear God's voice calling to us. Again, with special moments of grace aside, someone wiser than myself once said that success is the combination of timing and luck. I think it was something along those lines. But being prepared for that opportunity is crucial, and always preparing ourselves as such. So prayer changes the focus from this world to eternity. And when those moments that God speaks to us come about, we're always ready to listen. And so the original question was something along the lines of, how do I hear God's voice? Or when God is speaking to me, how do I know? Or does anybody even answer my prayers? And the answer, simply put, after all of those words, to condense it, is to always try to be in a state where you can hear it regardless of how it manifests. Because if we are ready to accept it, if we're in a place for it, it can speak to us in any way. Watching the leaves on a tree, somebody saying something in a passing conversation, and you have this aha moment. But if you're not in that place, these things pass us by, which again, a blessing in itself, but to be open to listening to a response from prayer, trying to have ourselves focused on this as much as possible, or in contemplation of it, forgive me, that's more in line with what I was saying before. And again, simply meditating every day, it helps to deepen this practice. And we could talk about meditation tomorrow, if anyone would like, in more depth at least. I feel fine about doing that. So if that interests anybody, let me know. But as for now, I think this is a good stopping point. It was pretty dense, so forgive me. Again, don't hesitate to send any questions or comments. We can address those tomorrow before we start. So see you tomorrow, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being here. And have a good night and God bless. Thanks for everything. Bye.